Grab your tools and get out of my workshop right now. Fernando's shout, sharp and laced with fury, sliced through the usual mechanical hum of the garage. It echoed, bouncing off the concrete walls and the rows of gleaming tools, loud enough to make customers at the reception desk peer out through the glass window, their curiosity piqued by the sudden commotion. You're fired for insubordination and putting our customers at risk. Camila stood motionless in the center of the workshop, a wrench still clutched in her hand. At 24, with 6 years of experience as a mechanic, her fingers still felt the subtle vibration of the Harley-Davidson she had just expertly repaired, the one belonging to the biker who had just sped away, a desperate man rushing against time. Around her, her 5 male colleagues kept their eyes lowered, feigning intense focus on their own work, a collective silence stifling the space. It was broken only by the low thrum of distant machinery, a stark contrast to the thumping in Camila's chest. Fernando, I just helped a desperate father get to the hospital to see his daughter, Camila said, her voice surprisingly calm, a quiet counterpoint to the manager's hysterical tone. Any decent person would have done the same thing. Any decent person would have followed protocol. Fernando jabbed a finger at her, his face a mottled red with unbridled anger. That tattooed bum could have stolen, assaulted someone, or worse. And you, without authorization, decide to play social heroine. What Fernando didn't know, couldn't possibly grasp in his rigid world of rules and prejudice, was that Camila had grown up being judged in exactly the same way as that motorcyclist. The daughter of a cleaning lady and a security guard, she knew firsthand the crushing weight of prejudiced looks, the sting of denied opportunities, the insincerity of fake smiles that held thinly veiled contempt. For years, she had been the only black woman in workshops dominated by white men who questioned her competence with every screw she tightened, every engine she diagnosed. Just 3 hours earlier, the man in the leather jacket had rushed into the workshop, his desperation palpable, begging for help to fix his motorcycle that had broken down just around the corner. All the other mechanics, following an unspoken code, had simply turned their backs. We don't serve bikers here, Fernando had declared, without even glancing up from his desk. You can look somewhere else. Ricardo, the senior mechanic, had made sure to whisper loudly enough for everyone to hear. These guys are trouble. Better not get involved. The others had nodded in agreement, a collective, silent decision to completely ignore the raw despair etched on the father's face. But Camila saw something the others refused to see. She saw a desperate father with tears in his eyes, explaining that his 8-year-old daughter was in intensive care after an accident, and that the motorcycle was his only means of transportation. His hands had trembled as he showed her a photo on his cell phone, a smiling little girl in a hospital bed. Please, he had begged, his voice breaking. It's just a problem with the ignition. Any mechanic can fix it in 15 minutes. My little girl is alone and scared. While Fernando was in his office, attending to a high-paying customer, discussing the prices of imported parts with his usual pompous arrogance, Camila had discreetly signaled to the motorcyclist. She knew she was risking her job, but something inside her, a deep-seated sense of human connection, simply couldn't stand by and watch that man suffer. In 15 minutes of swift, silent work, she identified and fixed the ignition problem. It was exactly as she had suspected, a loose wire that any experienced mechanic could have effortlessly rectified. The relief on the man's face was immediate and overwhelming. Thank you, the biker had muttered, squeezing her hand tightly, his voice choked with emotion. You saved my life today. My name is Daniel, and I'll never forget what you did. He had tried to offer her money, but Camila had refused with a simple, decisive gesture. Just take care of your daughter, she had replied. Now, facing Fernando's unbridled fury, Camila allowed herself a slight, almost imperceptible smile. It wasn't a smile of defeat, but something far more dangerous, the serene expression of someone who had just discovered precisely what kind of person she was fighting. Fernando wasn't truly angry for reasons of security or protocol. He was angry because she had treated a tattooed biker like a human being, challenging his rigid worldview. You can be sure I'll never forget this moment either, Fernando, she replied, putting away her tools with deliberate, almost defiant calm. Neither will you, nor anyone else who was here today and kept quiet. Her colleagues avoided her gaze. Rodrigo, who always asked for her help with more complex engines, suddenly became intensely interested in the tires he was changing. Paolo, who had shared his lunch with her just last week, turned his back on her completely. As she walked toward the door, Fernando's voice boomed once more. "And don't dream about getting a recommendation. I'll make sure no decent workshop in town will hire you. You'll learn that there's a hierarchy and respect here." Camila stopped at the door, turned slowly, and looked each man in the eye. There was something in her gaze that made some of them look away, a silent determination that only exists in those who have weathered much worse storms and survived to rewrite their own story. "Fernando," she said, her voice low but laden with an authority he had never heard before, an authority that spoke of a deeper knowledge than his superficial rules, "you just made the biggest mistake of your career. And the worst part is, you don't even know why." What happened next would not only transform Camila's life but would expose secrets that would force Fernando to question every decision he had ever made in his career. His casual cruelty was about to ignite a fire he could never hope to control. 3 days after the dismissal, Fernando couldn't stop smiling. He had recounted the story to at least 10 different people, each retelling emphasizing how he had definitively put that mechanic in her place. During lunch at the bustling restaurant near the workshop, he gestured excitedly to colleagues from other companies. "You should have seen her face when I told her I'd make sure no one in town would hire her." Fernando roared with laughter, cutting into his steak with relish. "These people need to understand that charity belongs in church, not in my workshop." Ricardo, who had been present during the dismissal, just nodded in agreement, carefully avoiding any mention that Camila had, on numerous occasions, repaired engines he himself couldn't diagnose. Paolo, who had worked side by side with her for 2 years, limited himself to forced laughter, desperately trying to forget how many times she had saved him from embarrassment with customers. Meanwhile, Camila walked through the sun-baked streets of downtown, visiting repair shop after repair shop. The reaction was always the same: polite smiles that quickly morphed into vague excuses as soon as she mentioned her previous employer. "Oh, you worked at Fernando's shop," said the manager at Auto Tech, his expression immediately hardening. "He called me yesterday. Said you had some attitude problems. Unfortunately, we don't have any openings at the moment." At the 5th shop, they didn't even let her finish speaking. "We don't hire people with a history of insubordination," was the curt, dismissive response she received at the door. Camila had always known this day might come. She had grown up watching her mother, Dona Rosa, get fired from 3 different jobs for not fitting the company profile, a fancy euphemism for saying that a black woman questioning unsafe procedures was simply not welcome. At age 12, Camila had found her mother crying in the kitchen after being accused of theft by a white supervisor, who later discovered she had merely left her purse in her car. "Daughter," Dona Rosa had said that night, drying her tears, "in this world, people like us have to be 3 times better to get half the recognition. But that doesn't mean we should accept injustice silently." It was this deeply ingrained lesson that had led Camila to specialize in auto mechanics, studying late into the night after working as a general assistant during the day. She knew she would have to prove her worth constantly, but she never imagined that simply doing the right thing would be punished so cruelly. On Friday, Fernando received a call that made him even more excited than usual. It was James Morrison, the owner of a prestigious chain of premium repair shops, interested in a business partnership. "I hear you have good control over your team," Morrison said on the other end of the line, his voice smooth and authoritative. "I don't tolerate employees who cause problems or question authority. I need managers who maintain discipline." Fernando sat up straighter in his chair, feeling his ego inflate. "You can count on me, Mr. Morrison. I just solved a problem like that. An employee who thought she could ignore protocols. I showed her who's boss around here." "Excellent," Morrison replied. "Let's set up a meeting for next week." While Fernando mentally celebrated his imminent promotion, Camila sat in the small apartment she shared with her mother, calmly typing on her laptop. She wasn't looking for a job online. She was doing something far more strategic. For 6 years, working for Fernando, she had quietly documented every discriminatory comment, every mistreated customer, every questionable practice she had witnessed. Not out of revenge, but out of caution. Dona Rosa had taught her that people like them always needed evidence when facing injustice. Now, methodically organizing screenshots of messages, audio recordings from her cell phone, and detailed notes with dates and witnesses, Camila realized she held something much more powerful in her hands than Fernando could ever imagine. Her phone rang, startling her slightly. It was Daniel, the motorcyclist she had helped. "Camila, I heard you were fired for helping me." His voice carried genuine guilt and concern. "This is unacceptable. I want to do something to make it up to you." "Daniel, you don't owe me anything," Camila replied, her voice soft but firm. "I did what any decent person would do." "Maybe," he said, a pause stretching between them. "But few people would be fired for that. Listen, I need to tell you something about who I really am. Do you have time to talk in person?" Fernando slept peacefully that night, convinced he had definitively solved the Camila problem. He had no idea that just a few miles away, a monumental turnaround was being planned, one that would transform his life into a public nightmare, vividly demonstrating that underestimating the intelligence and determination of a woman like Camila would be the biggest mistake he had ever made in his entire career. Every new humiliation Fernando imposed only strengthened something inside Camila that he couldn't see. A silent, potent force fueled by the very injustice he was trying to impose, a force that would soon reveal itself in a way he could never have predicted. The cafe was almost empty when Camila arrived on Saturday morning. Daniel was already there, looking less like the desperate biker she'd helped and more like an ordinary businessman in a crisp blue dress shirt. Only the intricate tattoos on his arms hinted at the man who had rushed into her workshop just 3 days earlier. "How's your daughter?" was Camila's first question as she sat down, a genuine concern softening her guarded expression. "Much better, thanks to you," Daniel sighed deeply, a wave of relief washing over his face. "Camila, I need to tell you something that will completely change this situation," Daniel began, leaning forward slightly. "My full name is Daniel Morrison." Camila frowned, the name striking a familiar chord. "Morrison. As in Morrison Automotive Group." A surprised realization began to dawn on her. "I'm the son of James Morrison, owner of the premium auto repair chain that's negotiating a partnership with Fernando's shop." Daniel paused, watching the shocked expression spread across her face. "My father doesn't know I ride motorcycles or that I have tattoos. We had a nasty fight a while ago because of my lifestyle. He cut me off financially, so I've been working as a freelance mechanic." Camila processed the information slowly, the pieces clicking into place with a chilling clarity. "So you're the rebellious son of the most powerful man in the automotive industry in the region, and you saved my daughter." Daniel nodded. "Camila, my father hates injustice in the workplace. If he knew how you were treated, I don't want pity," Camila said firmly, cutting him off. "It's not pity," Daniel countered, a strategic glint in his eye. "It's justice and strategy." He smiled, a genuine, determined smile. "Let me tell you my plan." Meanwhile, Fernando was meticulously preparing for Monday's meeting with James Morrison. He'd had the entire workshop cleaned, instructed the employees on how to behave, and even bought a new suit. This partnership would mean advancing his career to a level he had only ever dreamed of. "Ricardo," he called out to the senior mechanic on Sunday, his voice full of self-importance. "When Morrison comes tomorrow, make sure everyone is working. I want it to look like we have the most disciplined team in town." "What if he asks about employees who recently left?" Ricardo hesitated, a flicker of unease in his eyes. "Tell him we cleaned house, got rid of the problem elements." Fernando smiled with satisfaction, oblivious to the implications of his words. "Morrison will love to know that I keep order here." At Camila's small apartment, she and her mother were organizing documents on the kitchen table. Dona Rosa examined the evidence her daughter had collected over 6 years, screenshots of discriminatory conversations, audio recordings of prejudiced comments, records of customers mistreated because of racial bias. "Daughter, this is a bombshell," Dona Rosa shook her head, impressed, her eyes wide. "You have evidence of at least 20 different cases of discrimination." "I learned from you, Mom," Camila smiled sadly, a poignant memory passing between them. "Always keep evidence." But now, she had something Fernando could never imagine. Daniel had offered more than moral support, As an experienced mechanic and Morrison's son, he knew the industry inside out. "Camila, you're more qualified than 90% of the men I've met in this business," Daniel had told her, his voice full of conviction. "My father needs to know that." "I don't want pity," Camila reiterated, unwavering. "It's not pity," Daniel assured her, "it's justice and strategy." Monday morning, Fernando arrived 2 hours early, checking every detail with obsessive fervor. At 10 o'clock, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up in front of the workshop. James Morrison stepped out, a man in his 60s with impeccable grey hair and the commanding posture of someone who ran a multimillion-dollar empire. "Mr. Morrison, it's an honor to have you here," Fernando rushed to greet him, almost tripping over his own excitement. "Pleased to meet you, Fernando." Morrison shook his hand firmly, his gaze subtly taking in the environment. "Tell me about your leadership philosophy." "Discipline above all else, sir. I don't tolerate employees who question authority or cause problems. Just last week, I had to fire a problematic employee who—" "Oh, really?" Morrison raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "What kind of problem?" Fernando, excited to have captured the tycoon's attention, began to recount in meticulous detail how he had fired Camila for insubordination and risking safety by helping a suspicious motorcyclist. The more he talked, the prouder he became of his firm leadership decision. James Morrison listened silently, but something in his expression was gradually changing. His eyes, previously interested, became cold as ice. Fernando, absorbed in his own narrative, failed to realize that he had just confessed to precisely the kind of behavior Morrison despised most. "Interesting," Morrison muttered when Fernando finished, his voice now flat, devoid of its previous cordiality. "And where might I find this problematic employee?" "Don't worry about that, Mr. Morrison," Fernando said, a smug smile spreading across his face. "I made sure she won't get a job at any decent repair shop in the area." At that very moment, across town, Camila received a call that would change everything. It was Daniel. "Camila, I just talked to my father. He wants to meet you today at 2 o'clock in the afternoon." What Fernando didn't know was that his desperate excitement to impress Morrison had sealed his own fate. Every word of his self-incriminating narrative had been carefully listened to and memorized by the father of the suspicious biker he so despised. While Fernando proudly showed off his facilities, imagining his future promotion, a trap was being set that would turn his biggest professional opportunity into the most humiliating moment of his career, proving that underestimating people can cost far more than just a job. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Camila entered James Morrison's elegant office in the city center. The tycoon greeted her personally, a gesture he rarely extended to lower-level employees. Daniel stood beside his father, now wearing an impeccable suit that clearly revealed his true position within the company. "Camila, my son told me what you did for our family," Morrison began, his voice laden with genuine emotion, a stark contrast to Fernando's coldness. "He also told me how you were treated for it." "Mr. Morrison, Camila started, but Morrison gently interrupted her. "You saved my granddaughter, and you were fired by a man who, 3 hours ago, proudly told me how he got rid of a problem employee who helped a suspicious motorcyclist." Morrison's gaze hardened, a cold smile touching his lips. Fernando has no idea who that suspicious motorcyclist is. Meanwhile, back at the workshop, Fernando was finishing his meeting with Morrison, convinced he had secured the partnership of his dreams. "I'm sure our values are aligned, Mr. Morrison. Discipline and order have always been my priorities." "Without a doubt," Morrison replied, putting away documents with a deliberate calm that Fernando misinterpreted as satisfaction. "In fact, I'd like to meet this problematic employee you fired. Where can I find her?" Fernando laughed, thinking Morrison wanted to use Camila as an example of what not to tolerate. "I can give you her address, but I guarantee that after our conversation, no workshop in the area will hire her back." Back at the office, Camila showed Morrison and Daniel the arsenal of evidence she had meticulously collected over 6 years. Screenshots of discriminatory conversations, audio recordings of prejudiced comments, detailed records of customers mistreated due to racial bias. "My God," Morrison muttered, examining the documents, his face growing grim. This is a systematic pattern of discrimination, and you documented everything. My mother taught me that people like us always need proof, Camila explained calmly, her voice steady. Fernando thought I was just another mechanic. He didn't know I had a bachelor's degree in business and was studying law at night. Morrison called his chief lawyer immediately. I need you to look into a case of employment discrimination, and I also want you to investigate all of Fernando Silva's practices at his repair shop. 2 hours later, Fernando received a call that changed everything. It was Morrison, but now his voice had lost all its cordiality, replaced by an icy, cutting tone. Fernando, change of plans. Tomorrow's meeting will be at your shop at 9 o'clock in the morning, and bring all your employees. All of them. Of course, Mr. Morrison, it will be my pleasure. Fernando replied, elated, unaware of the menacing undertone in Morrison's voice. Oh, and Fernando, bring all the hiring and firing records from the last 5 years. I want to personally review your people management. Fernando hung up, still buzzing with excitement. He spent the rest of the afternoon preparing, ordering all the mechanics to arrive early and be impeccable the next morning. The next morning, Morrison arrived, accompanied by Daniel, 3 lawyers, a representative from the Ministry of Labor, and to Fernando's complete shock, Camila. Good morning, Fernando, Morrison said, his voice cutting like steel, devoid of any warmth. I'd like to introduce my legal team and my new director of operations, Camila Santos. Fernando turned pale instantly, his jaw dropping. Mr. Morrison, there must be some mistake. The only mistake here was believing that you would be suitable for a partnership with my company, Morrison replied coldly, walking around the workshop, observing every detail with a discerning eye. I've discovered some interesting things about your management. Daniel approached Fernando, a smile on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes, a quiet storm brewing within. Dad, this is the man who called me a tattooed bum and refused to see me when my daughter was in the hospital. The realization hit Fernando like a physical punch to the stomach. His legs buckled, and he had to lean on a workbench, his face a mask of dawning horror. I'm Daniel Morrison, son of the man you wanted so badly to do business with, Daniel replied calmly, his voice a quiet, powerful echo. And I owe my life to the woman you fired for helping me. The representative from the Ministry of Labor approached, a folder full of documents in hand. Mr. Fernando Silva, based on the evidence presented, your workshop is being charged with systematic discriminatory practices. The fines total 300,000 reais. Camila finally spoke, her voice calm but laden with an authority that left no room for argument. Fernando, for 6 years you treated me as if I were inferior. You made jokes about my color, questioned my competence, paid me 20% less than my less qualified male colleagues. She opened a laptop and displayed detailed spreadsheets. I documented every incident, every discriminatory comment, every customer you treated differently because of racial prejudice. It's all here, with dates, times, and witnesses. Ricardo and Paulo, who were present during the dismissal, tried to leave discreetly, but one of the lawyers intercepted them. You are important witnesses in this case. You're not going anywhere. Morrison addressed Fernando with visible contempt. Not only have you lost an exceptional employee because of prejudice, you have exposed your true nature to the wrong man at the wrong time. The partnership is cancelled. Morrison continued, symbolically tearing up the contracts, the sound sharp in the silent room. And I will personally ensure that every workshop in the region knows exactly what kind of manager you are. Fernando tried to speak, but only incoherent sounds came out of his mouth. His face was white as a sheet, sweat pouring down his forehead. The professional empire he had meticulously built was crumbling in a matter of minutes. Camila, Morrison turned to her, his voice now filled with respect. Your first decision as the new owner of this shop will be what to do with the former manager. Fernando almost fainted, his eyes wide with disbelief. Owner? I'm buying this shop, Morrison explained coldly, and Camila will be responsible for turning it into an example of how a workplace should function. Camila looked at Fernando for a long moment, then addressed the other mechanics who were watching in stunned silence. You have a choice. You can stay and learn to work in an environment of mutual respect, Or you can follow Fernando's example. As Fernando was escorted out of his own workshop by lawyers, carrying only a small box with his personal belongings, Camila realized that this moment symbolized much more than personal justice. It represented a complete transformation of a system that had long protected people like Fernando and punished people like her, proving that sometimes the universe conspires to serve justice in the most poetic way possible. What Richard didn't realize in his self-serving worldview, and what Fernando would now bitterly discover in the sterile confines of a jail cell, was that Victoria had meticulously planned not only his downfall but also the complete, systemic rebuilding of her own life. The Blackwood Empire, now stripped bare of its toxic facade, had a new heir who would ensure its power would be wielded to uplift precisely the kind of people Richard used to trample upon. Fernando, meanwhile, faced a starkly different reality, a cruel irony served cold. 6 months later, the workshop that had once reeked of prejudice and exclusion had been utterly transformed into a model of excellence and inclusion. Camila hired 3 women mechanics and 2 young black men who had recently graduated from technical courses, meticulously curating the diverse, thriving environment she had always dreamed of. Productivity soared by an astounding 40%, and the customer waiting list stretched 3 weeks long, a testament to their newfound reputation. "Boss, we just got another 5-star review on Google," announced Roberto, a former colleague who had stayed on the team after formally apologizing to Camila. The customer said they've never been so well served at a repair shop. Paulo, who had also decided to remain, had become one of the most fervent advocates of the new management. "Camila, I need to tell you something," he confided during a coffee break. "I've worked here for 5 years, and I've never felt so proud of my work. Thank you for giving me a second chance." The most remarkable transformation, however, had taken place between Daniel and James Morrison. The father and son who had been driven apart by social class issues were now working in seamless harmony to expand the business. Daniel had officially taken over the management of a new division focused on independent mechanics and small, family-owned repair shops. "You know," Morrison told Camila during a routine visit, a proud glint in his eye, "my son has taught me more about leadership in the last 6 months than I've learned in 30 years in business. And it all started with your courage to help a stranger." Meanwhile, Fernando faced a completely different reality. Fired without references, burdened with pending labor lawsuits, and his reputation utterly destroyed on social media after a video of the confrontation leaked, he had been forced to accept a job as a junior mechanic at a small, nondescript workshop in the suburbs. Ironically, he now worked under the supervision of a young black man who tolerated no discriminatory comments. Fernando, his new boss, had said on his first day, his voice firm, "Everyone here is equal. If you can't work with that, the door is open." Ricardo, who had been a silent accomplice to the discrimination, tried to find work at other garages in the area but found that Morrison's network of contacts was extensive and efficient. No one wanted to hire someone associated with the discriminatory practices of the former management. Camila's workshop became a case study in business schools. Students visited regularly to understand how leadership based on respect and competence could transform not only financial results but the entire organizational culture. "The secret," Camila explained to the students, her voice confident, "is not just hiring different people. It's creating an environment where difference is seen as strength, not as a problem." During an interview with a management magazine, Camila reflected on her journey. "When Fernando fired me, he thought he was punishing me. In fact, he freed me from a system that would never give me the recognition I deserved." Daniel's young daughter, now fully recovered, occasionally visited the workshop. She had adopted Camila as an aunt, always asking when she could fix cars like Aunt Camila. Morrison had even set up a scholarship fund in the girl's name, specifically for young people from disadvantaged communities interested in auto mechanics. "Daddy," the girl said during one of these visits, her eyes wide with innocent curiosity, "why didn't people help you when your motorcycle broke down?" Daniel looked at Camila, a quiet understanding passing between them, before answering, "Because they judged by appearances, not by the heart. But Aunt Camila is different. She sees people for who they really are." On the first anniversary of the new management, Camila organized a party at the workshop. Old and new customers, employees, family members, and even some competitors were in attendance. Morrison gave an emotional speech about how a simple choice to do the right thing had transformed not just a company, but several lives. "A year ago," Morrison said into the microphone, his voice resonating with conviction, "my company almost partnered with someone who represented everything we despise. Today, I work with someone who represents everything we admire." Dona Rosa, Camila's mother, watched proudly from the front row, tears welling in her eyes. "Daughter," she whispered later, squeezing Camila's hand, "remember when I told you that people like us have to be 3 times better? You've proven that when we're better, we change the whole game." Camila's story inspired other business owners in the region to review their hiring and management practices. 3 new workshops adopted similar inclusion policies, creating a ripple effect that transformed the local auto industry. Fernando, now working quietly in his new position, occasionally saw news stories about the success of the former employee he had fired. In moments of quiet reflection, he began to understand the magnitude of what he had lost because of prejudices he now recognized as foolish and destructive. "The best revenge," Camila often said in her leadership talks, "is not to destroy those who hurt you. It is to build something so extraordinary that they realize exactly what they lost by underestimating you." Today, as she watches her team working in harmony, repairing cars for customers who trust her blindly, Camila smiles. She remembers the day she was fired for doing the right thing. Fernando tried to destroy her, but he ended up creating the perfect conditions for her to discover her true strength. The workshop wasn't just a thriving business, it was living proof that justice isn't just a pretty word, but a transformative force that, when applied correctly, benefits not only those seeking redress but the entire society around them. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes, the biggest obstacles are just opportunities in disguise, waiting to reveal what we are truly capable of when we refuse to accept injustice as our destiny.